Narendra Modi rose to power in India with his Bharatiya Janata Party, presenting himself as an economic reformer fighting corruption and aiming to elevate the middle class. Now as Modi pursues a rare third term, economic experts caution about a growing gap between the rich and the poor. India's income and wealth inequality has surged to among the highest globally, surpassing even countries like Brazil, South Africa, and the United States, as indicated by a study from the World Inequality Lab. But what's shocking here is that the study reveals that income inequality in India now surpasses levels observed during British colonial rule. Let's delve into the severity of India's inequality according to this research. During the 1930s under British rule, the wealthiest 1% controlled just over 20% of the national income. This share decreased during World War II, dropping to slightly above 10% in the 1940s and 12.5% among India's independence in 1947. The figure remained relatively stable until the late 1960s. However, with the socialist policies of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, such as nationalizing banks, the income share of the top 1% plummeted to approximately 6% in 1982. This trend reversed with India's economic liberalization in 1991. By the early 2000s, the top 1% held over 15% of India's income. When Narendra Modi assumed power in 2014, this figure had exceeded 20%, reaching an unprecedented 22.6% by 2022 to 2023. India's rapidly growing economy, with a GDP expanding by over 7% annually, despite expectations that the free market would reduce inequality, this hasn't been the case. Now let's consider wealth inequality. If India's income gap is substantial, its wealth gap is even more significant. In 1961, the top 1% controlled less than 15% of the national wealth. Today, their share exceeds 40%. The wealth of the richest individuals remained relatively stable before the liberalization era but surged after 1991, surpassing 20% before the turn of the century. It ranged between 30 and 35% when Narendra Modi assumed office. However, as Modi seeks re-election a decade later, escalating inequalities suggest that many Indians are facing as much, if more, financial hardship than they did. Yet, Modi's recent campaign has shifted towards religious polarization, departing from the economic promises of 2014. The middle class's piece of the income pie is getting smaller. The richest 1% have over a fifth of the money, and top 1% have nearly 60%. Back in 1982, after independence, the top 10% had 30%, but after 1991, it shot up. They also have around 65% of the country's wealth. Meanwhile, the middle 40% are losing out the most. Their share of the income dropped from over 45% in the 1980s to around 27% now. And things are even tougher for the poorest half of Indians. Their share went from over 23% to just 15%. The slowdown in relative upward mobility for the Indian class isn't surprising, experts note. The privatization of the economy alongside globalization disproportionately benefits those with higher education levels, often skewed towards wealthier and upper caste communities. Now let's explore the lives of India's wealthiest and poorest. How rich are India's richest? Recently, the nation witnessed the opulent lifestyles of many top earners during the pre-wedding festivities of Anant Ambani, son of Asia's wealthiest individual, Mukesh Ambani. The extravagant event, costing $120 million, was extensively covered by national media, showcasing the widening income gap. Since India's economic liberalization in 1991, the number of billionaires has surged from 1 to 271 by 2024, ranking third globally behind China and the US. Conversely, India harbors a quarter of the world's undernourished population, scoring poorly on the 2023 Global Health Index Severity of Hunger Scale. Millions face severe food insecurity and chronic hunger between 2019 and 2021. This wealth concentration extends even within the top 10%, with a stark disparity between the promises made in 2014 and the reality a decade later. So why has inequality worsened? Some factors exacerbating this gap and structural intertwined with India's trajectory since its economic liberalization in 1991. India has struggled to transition its agricultural workforce to higher paying occupations, partly due to an education system favoring tertiary education for elites. Recent global events and Indian policies such as demonetization, GST, and COVID-19 lockdown have further compounded these challenges, disproportionately affecting the informal sector. What's the solution? The author of the WIL study proposed a super tax on billionaires and multimillionaires as a tool to fight inequality, and restructuring the tax system to encompass both income and wealth. Education could play a vital role in addressing inequality by aligning human capital with job creation. The Communist Party of India proposed a wealth tax and inheritance tax in its 2024 election manifesto. The Congress Party pledges to reset the economic policy and address job loss growth. However, following Modi's accusations of wealth distribution to Muslims, the opposition clarifies it has no such plans. The BJP's dominance allows them to sidestep questions on inequality, potentially unaffected by adverse economic conditions.